Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of The Author's View with me, your host, Derek M. Cartwright. Today, I've got joining me the science fiction novelist Sally Amelia and the crime fiction writer Richard Fuller. Hello, guys.
Hello.
Hello.
Fantastic. Right, now, so Sally, what have you been up to this week? Come on.
Okay. We had Jelly, the Hogsback writers this week. So Saturday, all of us well, except for yourself, I think you were busy.
Yeah.
The Hogsback writers got together for 7 hours of writing in our village hall, which was quite good. So the village hall that we meet in is behind a church graveyard. And the group has been meeting there for 40 years. And it wonderfully it has quite a good kitchen, and it's got no Wi-Fi. This means that we eat rather well. We don't get
Yeah.
distracted. So it makes for a very good writing day. Yeah. So I got quite a lot done writing wise. Yeah, that was my weekend.
And I
Mhm.
presume, Richard, you were in attendance at this writing
Yes,
foray as
I,
well, yeah?
yes, I was indeed at the event, and I got through nearly 3,000 words and a fair amount of plotting as well. So that was very productive. And
Absolutely.
the cakes and the food weren't half bad either. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Fantastic. Great stuff. Right, then let's get on with what we're here to talk about today. So, this is all about characters, memorable characters, and how to actually write them. So, Richard, do you want to kick off and give us an idea of what makes a character memorable?
that's a good question, isn't it? I mean, I think it's something that the readers got to find out for themselves and they'll like. And I think we also need to think when we think about characters, we often think, presumably, your first thought is main characters. You're thinking of people like Jack Reacher, James Bond, people like this. But there's a whole host out there of minor characters that we mustn't forget. I mean, where would Sherlock be without Watson?
Yeah.
Or, in Sally's series, I think one of the greatest characters in Sally's series is of her science fiction books is Chart Sagat, who's a devious, dodgy, political, manipulative, mean mayor. And he is one of the great characters in that book, but he only plays a minor part in that series and crops up from time to time. So we mustn't forget the minor characters. And I don't know if you guys ever, there was a film a few years ago called 20 Feet from Stardom. And it was about backing singers for rock
All right.
bands
Yeah,
and
yeah.
musicians. And so, these guys, they hold it together. They provide the basis for the lead singer to run around the stage screaming his head off. But
Yeah.
without the backing singers 20 feet away holding it together, it wouldn't be there. So don't let's keep a shout out for minor characters.
Yeah,
If
I
we're
used to
talking,
play. I used to play in a band, and
yeah,
my thing was always about I'm the rhythm section. So
yeah.
let other people be the stars. I just sit there in the back and I just play, and it's all fun. But
Yeah.
yes,
But without that,
the
the
band. Yeah, it's
guy
not
at
the
the
same.
front with the microphone and the lead guitar wouldn't have a
Yeah,
wouldn't be anything, would it?
yeah.
So yeah.
So, what about yourself, Sally? How do you when you're writing um, your science fictions? Do you how do you develop your characters?
Yes, I think there is quite a lot written about how to write characters now. Um, and I think that so my process was that I just hear them inside my head.
Right.
They start talking to me or they pop out at me. But actually, that there is actually a better way than just waiting for people to appear. So it's normally quite useful if you can think of somebody who a lot of people will identify with. And I think they always say that in the first couple of pages, the character has to do something that makes him sympathetic to the reader. And this falls under the category of saving the cat, you know. So, like, the person can be a bad character or can just have done stolen something or done something which probably most people disagree with, as long as they save the cat in the same sequence and that we see, or that they take their misgotten earnings back to their blind grandmother, then then they're probably an okay person. And plus, it's made more complicated these days in that you have to try and broaden your appeal by trying to write a cosmopolitan audience. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
So I think where we are in Surrey, it's predominantly Anglo-Saxon and predominantly English people. And we have to think that when you go to London, it's a completely different experience where you've got, 100 different nationalities on Piccadilly Square. So you have to try and keep your fiction as open to as many people as possible.
Is it fair to say then that what we're talking about here is, in a sense, is making your characters believable, giving them a bit of depth? You're talking about saving a cat, as it were. You in a way, your character, you're creating a character with a contradiction. On one hand, they are, I don't know, a master of the universe about to destroy it. But look, there's a cat. It's creating that sort of idea to your reader that this is a person, this is a real person, something that they can possibly identify with.
Yes, and there are question sheets that you can fill in. So if you don't know your characters, you can look these up on the internet, say a list of questions for my character, and it includes things like, what is their eye color? What is their star sign? What was their favorite subject at school? What's their food? Now, actually, when you are writing a novel, that will never come up. You'll never actually say he was eating bananas, it was his favorite food.
Oh, we see that.
You won't in a science fiction novel anyway.
Sometimes I have characters that drink a lot of tea and eat hot cross buns, but there you go.
But there's no harm in your character eating their favorite food. What you don't want to be doing is sort of listing it out in chapter one as long as the download dumpy information. If in chapter 15 he's in a cafe and he goes, "Oh, great, they've got sticky toffee pudding. That's my favorite. I'm going to have some of that." That's fine, but don't dump it onto the reader as something that just so that you can say, look, I've developed this broad character with all these different likes and dislikes.
Because you're not actually writing a recipe book, are you?
No.
At the end of the day.
Yes. And actually it's interesting because you might have a character who drinks tea and eats hot cross buns, but then you've got your character who wants an oatmeal latte and won't eat anything that's got nuts in it.
Yeah.
And you've immediately got two different people in your head there.
Exactly. And I think that's interesting because that's another aspect, I think, of when you're doing your characters is to create characters that have unique voices. And straight away within those two sentences, you've got separate characters, haven't you?
Yes.
In
yes.
literally just a few words, and you've given them, each of those then has that unique voice, I suppose.
I think for me, I mean, like Sally said, these charts. I'm writing my fourth novel at the moment. And when I was writing my first couple, for each of the characters in it, I had pro forma filled out with all their, with their favorite foods and all this sort of background information that you can come up with. And as I've got further down my writing development stage and into novel 4, I've written less and less about their favorite foods and things like that, and I'm much more concentrating on, and I have notes for each character, but I will put in there what motivates them, what annoys them, what's their driving force, and so much more on the emotional front rather than the physical front. And when I'm writing that character into the novel, and if I find that my character has gone into that cafe and decides he's having sticky toffee pudding, then I will add as his favorite food, I will add that to my notes at that point in writing the novel, rather than developing it as part of his background before I start writing. And I find that this sort of is an evolving way of notifying your characters, and making the little notes allows me to keep track of it. So when it comes up later, I can remember what his favorite food was. But it does allow me to evolve the characters, and allows the characters to evolve organically themselves during the storytelling, which I think is an important thing.
And I was about to agree with you on that basically. I think when um, if you put in about on the internet or a creative writing course, the history and the standard approach has always been create a backstory for each of your characters. Create that backstory, and that implies in a way that you do that upfront. But of course, as you've just outlined, you don't need to be doing that upfront because, and to come back to one of Sally's points, the characters speak for themselves after a while. But, you get that going, you get the flow going. All of a sudden, you say, "Oh, actually, my character." It reminisces about school dinners or whatever it is, and you create that backstory as a ongoing process, as it were, as opposed to just setting out, oh, I'm going to write about Mr. Smith and he likes, from the start.
Yeah, I think it's very, very true because in my second novel, which was called Missing Redemption, I had three main characters. Tom, a sort of disgraced rock musician, Christine, the mother of a missing teenage student age girl, and Karen, who was a disgraced policewoman. She'd been demoted and was back to doing all the menial stuff. And I wanted to write this story about Tom, the sort of has-been rock musician trying to make a comeback, and he's got all these issues. And in fact, Christine took over the story, and she became the more important of the three main characters and had more of the story. And that was just how it came out, the organic development of telling this story. And I was quite happy with the way it turned out, but it wasn't the way I set out to write it. But the characters took over; they had a life of their own.
So, Sally, was that true with when you were writing your science fiction stuff? Because you've got lots of strong characters in your stories, haven't you?
Yes. I think one of the challenges I find I do find with science fiction is I watch a lot of science fiction and I read a lot of science fiction, and there still is a bit of a gender bias in that there's more blokes, more boys than there are girls. So one of the things that's really quite challenging is when you go to write a character, you say, okay, could this be a girl? Because actually, if you've got a flight commander or a pilot, mostly your representation of pilots will have been male. So it's good to sort of think about how you use your gender roles. And I think actually we should just have a quick recap of things that you should try and avoid when writing your female characters. And one very important thing is that female characters shouldn't be defined by the men they know. So there's that very thing as, does your female character ever have a conversation where she doesn't talk about a man? Question number one. Two, your female characters should not be primarily described by her physical attributes, even if she is only 5'1". Other physical attributes apply. She shouldn't be just killed and left on the slab. You cannot just have a dead body of a female without having set out a little bit beforehand who she is. And then finally, just maybe if she's just a waitress or other,
this is where I
up.
breathe a sigh of relief. I haven't done any of that. I don't think so anyway. I'm pretty certain.
But I do. It is a very good exercise if you can get to the end of your book and then identify a scene where you have two female characters sit down and have a conversation which doesn't involve a man. It's actually much trickier to do than you think, unless of course you've got all female characters.
Yeah.
I think that's a very important point you raised, Sally, though, about particularly in crime writing, that when you have that dead body on the slab, and obviously they had to be a person, and if they were a person, they would have had a mum and a dad, and brothers and sisters, and aunts and uncles, and grandparents, or whatever, husbands, children. And they've had all these people. And I think one of the important things you have to think about, in particularly in crime writing, is the impact of that death, albeit a fictional death, on the family of the deceased. And that's something you can't ignore. And this is what cozy crime does. The body is merely there as a vehicle to start the story. Whereas in real life, if you're writing gritty crime, then that has had a huge impact and affects lots of people. It affects the police or investigating, or anybody who's investigating. They're not immune to the effects of this person being killed, especially if it's not a particularly pleasant death. And so I think that it's always important to consider the wider aspects of the character and the impact anything that happens to that character has on the people around them.
Is that I hesitate to use the term, but that's creating a character's arc, isn't it? In a way,
Hmm.
you're creating that whole history and you're developing that it so it's no longer just a slab on the table.
Yeah, and I think it's important that you have a character. Every character should have a character arc. It be them, even if they've only, well, unless they just happen to be the guy selling ice creams from the ice cream van. But anybody who has a part to play in your story, you need to
Yeah.
have at least a modicum of a character arc for them and an idea of what that means. It'd be flat arc, negative arc, positive arc. What's happening to them, and how do they impact the story? How does the story impact them?
Yeah.
And your dead body has an impact beyond death because it affects other people in the story.
And I think storytelling has got a lot more sophisticated. I think in olden days, you would just start with a dead body, and a dead person, normally a young woman, would be shocking enough. Now, most stories, you'll see the young woman, she'll be leaving work, she'll be having a joke with a friend, she might be talking on the phone to her mum, and then she might end up dead a little bit while later on. I think a lot more stories now make that effort to build up a character before they get rid of them, which is really useful. And the other thing to avoid is what they call like the Chinaman or the third engineer syndrome, whereby you go off on a quest and you've got a disposable person on the end who's invariably going to end up dead. And just because you need to kill somebody, you just add them along, and you don't want to kill one of your main characters. And the quote about Chinaman dates back to the Knox's Ten Commandments, where he used to say, "I hate mysteries," where the punchline is the Chinaman or the butler did it. You've really got to build up your bad guy. Good, we're coming around to bad guys now. Before you finally have your denouement, they have to be there beforehand.
And I think bad guys is another interesting point. They've got to be nuanced and not just bad. They've got to have good points. We've all watched Blofeld in the Bond films with his cat that he loves and stroking his cat in his lap, and so he's not totally bad. And he's just because he's going for world domination doesn't mean he doesn't like his pet, and that's the sort of nuanced things that you've got to do with your bad guys these days. You can't just have them as black as an evil being stomping around killing people. They've got to have they're going to be sitting somewhere in the middle. They will have a family as well. They will have people they love and people they don't want to hurt. As when world domination happens, you've got to be rounded on all your characters.
Well, yes, and then you've got Darth Vader. I don't I don't remember him having any family life at all until he got to about film number 4 or 5.
Well, but it's still there in the background, isn't it? He still did have family, and
Eventually, yes.
Yeah. So, I'm just saying if your bad guy is going to be an important part of the story. Okay, I know Darth Vader was, but in general, they have to be more than just an evil person. They have to do they have to have good things and redeeming features, and to some extent you need to get your reader to sort of at least appreciate your bad guy rather than just thinking of them as a cardboard cutout that comes along with a gun and shoots somebody.
Is it worth saying at this point that actually what we need to be encouraging is that you reveal your characters, whether their flaws or their strengths or whatever, that you reveal those through their actions rather than just simply telling the reader, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. There's no point in just having them telling your reader what's going on. Let's see these bad guys having their moment of badness, and let's see them also having these redeeming features. Let's see them going around to Auntie's for tea, and I mean, taking her a bunch of flowers, and then unpacking his gun out of his bag and going around the corner and shooting the guy he wants. He's having a feud with, it's that sort of thing, and it makes you think, wow, this is an important, interesting character rather than just something there to move the story on.
It's one of the interesting things I find talking to crime novelists is just how dark their minds actually are, Richard.
Mm. Yes. If you want, well, when I was thinking about this topic, and I thought of thinking of sort of characters that are to remember. One of the interesting characters that is memorable to me is Luke Kalanick, who is one of the detectives in Helen Field's Perfect Kill, Perfect Silence, Perfect series of books. And she's written 7 or 8 of these, I think, off the top of my head, or maybe more. And he is half French, half Scottish, was working with Interpol in Paris, got accused of rape, and then goes back to Edinburgh to work in the Edinburgh police force and starts solving murders. And he's also a really handsome guy, which actually, from his point of view, creates all sorts of problems, because women are attracted to him, but he can't handle this because of this rape accusation, and he's fighting. He's really struggling with it, and he's a really memorable character. But just referencing your point about gruesomeness, Helen Field's books have some very gruesome crime in them. So, so you've got this dichotomy of this really handsome policeman trying to sort the crime out, and these absolutely abysmally gruesome crimes, which she doesn't hold back in talking about or showing us. So
yes, it's not your classic cozy crime.
It's not
approach.
No.
Excellent. I think it's also very important to talk about the death of a character. And I think if you've built up a character, and then there comes a sequence where inevitably they could end up dead, or they do end up dead, I think it's really important that you spend some time thinking about that and allowing the character to die in a way that's memorable. But if you've had more than 3 chapters or more than half a book with somebody, you don't just want to dispatch them too quickly. It's my feeling.
Yeah. And you've dispatched plenty of characters in your time, Sally, so in your books.
Well, actually, my death rate is not that high. But interestingly, on my most recent book, the cast list was getting quite vast, because I had a tribe of natives. I had some military types. I had some imperial types. I had some aliens, and the cast list was getting quite long. So I think that's another interesting question. When you are working with fiction, you do have to try and keep your cast list under control, and then you have to think of ways of how you reduce your cast list without, you could send people home, for instance.
I'm very much of the opinion and follow the mantra that anyone that annoys me in real life becomes the character that I get rid of first in my next novel.
Well, that's one way of doing it. Yes,
Yeah.
I think we probably, as writers, all cherry pick bits of different people we know or have met.
Absolutely.
And we meld them together to form a new character of these composite bits from other people.
Yeah.
So they're not quite. You can't quite riddle. Hopefully, you'll never know that person will never say, oh, "That's me," but you've created a character that's got bits of different me's in it, and makes them memorable. Yeah.
Which brings us on actually to a really interesting aspect called libel, and actually using real people in fiction. I was reading today. Yes, it was the comedian. come to me in a minute? Dead Poet Society.
Robin Williams.
Robin Williams, his widow was in the paper today
Yep.
saying, will people stop creating AI videos of him?
Yeah.
And I didn't realize this was a thing, but apparently you can now go onto TikTok and you can see films of Robin Williams making jokes. He never made jokes, but you've also got films of Freddie Mercury meeting Michael Jackson, or Elvis Presley meeting Freddie Mercury, and then Michael Jackson saying things he never said. And apparently there was a law passed a couple of years ago whereby you couldn't create fake AI videos of live politicians and live people, but there is nothing to stop people, no law to stop people creating AI videos of people who are dead.
Yeah.
But I think more to the point, when you're writing fiction, if you are going to, what are the rules about referencing real people? What rules do you use, Richard, if you had to mention a politician, for instance?
I think I would try and avoid it if at all possible. Otherwise, if you mention them just as, if you were writing a story set in the early 80s and you mentioned that the Prime Minister was Margaret Thatcher, for example, I don't think there would be a problem with that.
Yep.
Only the problem comes if you were trying to say Margaret Thatcher was doing something that she didn't do.
Yep.
So it's okay to talk about these people, but it's what you have them doing in your novel that will be the problem.
Yeah, in the same way that if you reference, so my first novel in my World of Rock series of books, I use popular cultural references and pop music and lyric and titles and stuff like that. And you have to be very careful about how much you're using. There is this sense of fair use, and also that you're not libeling them, as you just pointed out, getting them to say things that they didn't say. But yeah, it is a bit of a minefield. So I have to say that although I've been quite careful in the music that I've chosen. So I might take the title of a famous song and just turn the words around a little bit, So it's still the same thing if you know the music. Yeah, does that make sense? Because it's a little bit funny in terms of what would be counted as libel, and also different countries have slightly differing libel laws. So it's best to avoid it, basically, is what we're saying.
Yeah, that's the beauty of writing science fiction, Sally. You can't be sued for something if all your characters are totally fictitious and it's on a different planet. So
no, I mean, science fiction, you're clear of life, but I do think it's interesting for people who write memoirs, or people who write historical fiction, or even people who are writing contemporary fiction. And we do see a lot of authors who do actually make a living from sort of writing contemporary fiction that reflects on some of the difficulties of the age.
Yeah.
Even if they don't call out a political party or a political policy as being the cause of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Right then. Are we just about done? I think
so.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yep. Goes
Excellent.
for me.
Okay. Well, I'm going to say it's a good night from me.
Yep. It's good night from me.
And it's good night from them.